Hey guys, it's Supersonic Q here, and today we're going to sculpt Shulk. So this is the much anticipated Shulk clay tutorial. Now before we start, I want to go over a couple things. So first is that I recommend you have some sort of background knowledge with clay or have used clay before, because despite this being a clay tutorial, it does get very challenging. So if you have no idea how to use clay or what you're really doing with it, I recommend you check out some of my easier tutorials before attempting Shulk. And second is that I encourage you to have some sort of reference picture right at your disposal so that when you're going through and sculpting all the little details, you yourself can visually see, a clear image of what exactly the small detail is that I'm sculpting on screen so that you guys can go through it at your own leisure. It helped me quite a bit to have the Smash Wii U trophy model that I could, rotate around and look at from different angles and stuff. So I encourage you to have some sort of thing like that. But without further introduction, it's time to sculpt Shulk. So the first thing we're going to do is roll some peach clay into a circle, and then after we've done that, we're going to pinch one of the edges to create kind of the chin, and this is essentially Shulk's head. After that, we're going to do the same thing except for a smaller piece of clay this time and attach it to this area of the head, and this is essentially the neck. You want to make sure that the neck is securely in place as well as defined enough from the chin so that both of them don't kind of mix in with each other. And once you do that, you can just kind of sculpt it a little bit better, make the chin and the neck area more defined, and then we're going to start putting on the hair once this step is done. So next is the hair. So what we're going to do to start the hair is create very large flat pieces using yellow clay. Now this is essentially going to be kind of the foundation that we're then going to build on top of. So like I said, I'm flattening clay and I'm going to put it on his head kind of towards the back to start. And then what we're going to do is do this a couple more times, and with each time, like I said, we're going to build up kind of the base layer of the hair. You also want to make sure you're pushing down hard enough so that the hair won't become detached from the head. And then once we progress through the larger pieces, as you're going to see in a moment, I'm going to start using smaller pieces because after we do the larger ones, we're going to have to fill in some smaller areas, and we actually start to kind of build kind of the depth of Shulk's hair in this way. Something else that I want to make a point of here that is going to become evident as well as we progress through is that feel free to consult the official artwork. So I'm primarily using Smash 4 artwork when I'm sculpting this. So just because I don't put a certain piece of hair a certain way doesn't mean you guys can't. This is roughly more or less a base. And if you guys look at the artwork and say like, oh, well, I want to add a little more hair here, or I feel like this should be there, then feel free to do that. What I feel that the hair is best illustrating here is exactly how to sculpt these certain shapes and how to apply them onto the head. But at this point, what we're primarily doing is covering the rest of the peach spots, and like I said, using smaller bits of clay to make sure that he has a full head of hair, which is what we want. So while I finish up adding the rest of these strands to Shulk's hair, we're soon going to go into a kind of technique to add depth to the clay model. So what I'm doing here is taking a toothpick, and I'm simply lightly drawing in lines on top of Shulk's hair to create kind of a wavy effect, a more realistic effect, and kind of just a texture that, in my opinion, adds more to the model, makes it a little bit more realistic. So next is the nose, and the toothpick is going to come in handy here as well. So I took a very small piece of clay and just put it on his face. And with the toothpick, preferably the side of the toothpick, is kind of roll the clay of his nose onto the clay of his face, as I'm kind of illustrating here. So you want to be gentle but firm with it, and you want to make sure that you kind of put enough of the clay from the nose into the face so that his nose isn't too large, because Shulk has a small nose. So just gently do this a couple times over until you kind of get it to your liking. And in a second here, I go perfectionistic and just kind of go all out trying to get this right. So once you get it to however you want it, then you can move on to the body, which is what we're going to get into next. So this is essentially his body, like his chest part and his stomach, like that whole area. So this is where we're going to soon attach the head. Now what I'm doing is sculpting this sort of like an hourglass shape, and I'm going to point the top of it, and then once I point it, I'm going to then flatten it with my finger. So once you do that, this is probably the most important part. I'm going to poke the top with a toothpick and rotate it around until I make a hole in that part that I flattened with my finger. This is going to be where the head is attached into. So I took the neck, cut a little bit of clay off, and then pointed the neck and stuck it into the hole in the body. And now the head is connected to the body. You just got to kind of make sure it's going to stay together. Just tighten it up a little bit. And then we're moving on to the arms. So kind of like with the head, we're going to take a circle of clay and kind of mush it right at this spot between the neck and kind of where the chest starts. So, like I said, we're going to try and push it into the clay, make sure it's definitely attached, and then I'm going to kind of make it a little bit longer. This is essentially the top of his arm. And what we're going to do after this is long enough is take another piece of clay and attach it to the bottom of that, which is going to be pretty much his lower arm, and together that creates Shulk's arm. After a little bit of tweaking, you can get it to exactly how you want it, exactly how it should look, and then just do the same thing for the other side, exactly as we did for the first arm. Alright, so the next step is the vest. So first take a red piece of clay and flatten it out into a rectangle like this, but don't make it too flat, just flat enough. Now what we're going to do is place it underneath Shulk at about this location. And from here we're going to take a toothpick and make cuts at about his shoulders. That's why you need to make sure the vest is placed underneath him at about that location. And then from those cuts we're going to take off the left and the right side of the vest. Now what this does is leave us with a little piece that we can easily wrap around the arms, both above and under the arms. And as you can see, when you turn it around, the red vest is on the front side of him as well. So this is going to act as a very good help. We're going to then take one of the pieces that we discarded and match it up right with that red spot that was underneath his arm. And we're simply going to connect the two pieces together so that it's seamless. So now we're going to do it for his other side. And what I'm going to do here in a sec, and you might need to do this as well, is kind of fold in this part of the vest just to wrap it around the arm a little bit better. But connecting it all works in the same way, and if you need to, which again I will illustrate in a second, I do have too much clay and it overlaps on some of his arms, so what I'm going to do is kind of take the fold and kind of meld it into each other so that you can't see that fold in the seam of the vest. And once you complete that, the vest in itself is pretty much done. We're just going to add some details to it later on, but what I'm going to show now is kind of a really quick detail overlap. So what essentially this is all the details on Shulk's clothes and the everything that he has in him. But the reason why I decided to speed this up is because it illustrates a lot of the techniques we've done so far with using the toothpick to kind of smooth things out and stuff, or attach things to the flat surface. And so much of this, as I mentioned earlier, is dependent on just looking at the artwork and creating that shape out of clay that I felt it was better to just kind of say this is what needs to be added to Shulk so you guys can add at your own leisure instead of going through every single specific little detail. Additionally, that's kind of why I said that you should have some kind of background with clay, even if it's just a little bit, before trying to attempt this character, because he is very detailed and he is very, complicated, and something like this, definitely kind of expresses the complexity that, it is to get all the details and stuff on him. So this is just me doing it really quick, but I'm using Smash 4 artwork, so if you guys follow that, then you should be in good hands. Just to outline some of the techniques though, a lot of it is using the toothpick to kind of smooth things out or make holes in certain areas. A lot of it is just flattening clay, making flat circles, or using the toothpick to push things or pull things. So it's, like I said, a lot of it is just kind of expressing the detail that the character has on him in the artwork, just making the flat shapes, using the toothpick to create lines in, his vest to create texturing and, things of that nature. It's not so much like actually sculpting the three-dimensional shapes of Shulk. But if anybody needs any help on anything here, like how to use the toothpick to a certain technique, or anything specific on the details I am fast forwarding through here, then feel free to leave a comment and I can help you with that. So next are the hands. What I'm going to do right now is roll the clay into a circle as we've done many times before and kind of point it at one of the ends. Now I'm going to flat it on the piece of paper I'm working on and essentially take a toothpick and cut the finger holes in the larger part of the peach clay. So once I do that and the finger slits are deep enough so that they're not connected together or anything, I'm going to take each one separately and kind of work with it, sculpt it, form it into the shape that a finger should be. And in this case, some of them are kind of distorted, so you might need to add some more clay to some of them. You might need to take some clay off of some of them, but just as long as you kind of sculpt it and mold it around to what a hand should look like, then this is pretty much the technique I've been using for years, and it works pretty well. And then once you get it to your liking, you can kind of point the end a little bit and attach it to Shulk, or at the very least, make sure it's the right size. It shouldn't be too large or too small. And then do the exact same thing for his other arm, except this time the hand would be flipped because this is his other side. So now I'm going to add some details to the arms. I have these two bands kind of on his arm, and now I'm attaching this flat piece in between the two, which is, I don't really know what it is, it's one of his designs. And after that, I take these little bits of clay and kind of put them together like this, and that's just more detail. And then I go for the toothpick and add some little indentation to make it look like whatever it's really supposed to be on him. And then I add some more blue to create some more little buckles, flatten that piece of clay, and then use the toothpick to make a little hole in it so that it looks like a buckle. And then I add one more buckle on the top of his arm, and we continue on to the back, poking some more holes, just doing some more detail work, and then we get to the back of his jacket. So I'm flattening some gray clay, putting it on the back, along with some more etched in toothpick designs, a larger piece of gray over the two circles, and then I add some more blue designs on there and use the toothpick to kind of even them out and kind of make them look a little bit better. So you want to take some red clay now and flatten it into this kind of shape and attach it onto the back of Shulk. I guess this acts as a hood. And then once you do that, add a layer of gray and some more of those random details on top of the gray to create the pattern on the back of that hood. Then if you're picky like me and mess with it for a few minutes, after that we're going to add some more details etched on with a toothpick, just kind of some seam lines and things like that. And once the intricacies are out of the way, we move on to adding some strips of white and red to the bottom of his body, and we pretty much just use the same technique, roll long thin strips and kind of just press them on gently to get them to stay there. Now it's time for a strip of blue, which we're going to do some fancy things to in a second, but first we're just going to wrap it around like we did the white and the red, and later on we will use a toothpick to kind of make a pattern with it. Okay, so Shulk's pattern is kind of like a combination of up and down waves. So all I'm doing is taking the toothpick, kind of pushing the clay, the blue clay, onto the brown clay, and just using the side of it and the tip of it to kind of pull and push that blue line that we put down to create the wave effect as you can see here. And you just have to do that all the way around. It takes some time, to kind of get it right to your liking, but this is kind of the best way I could think to do it, and it works pretty well. So I went with it, and after a while I ended up with a wavy pattern at the bottom of Shulk's shirt. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Shulk's pants. This is an essential part of the clay figure. So what I'm doing is kind of like what I did with the body. I kind of roll the shape into a long shape, and then I go to one end with my finger while rotating the clay and create this larger opening at one of the ends. This is where we're going to put Shulk's legs. So I kind of just do that until it's large enough so that when attached to the body, it will, completely attach to Shulk's lower torso. And I'm essentially going to do the same thing again, making it the same size and shape as the first one because, again, we want these to be as close to each other as they possibly can be. So I think that's a pretty good size, and as always, we can compare it to Shulk to make sure it's the right size that it should be. And then I just kind of do a little bit of tweaking, making sure, again, that it fits on right. And once it does, I kind of gently push it on very carefully without smudging anything. And once it's securely on, we move on to the legs. For the legs, we start off just like with pretty much everything else. You roll it into a circle, and then from there you kind of elongate it a little bit. Now, the key here is to make one end of the leg slightly larger than the other. So as you can see here, the part that I'm going to put inside the short is a little bit larger than the bottom, which is where, the shoe is going to go. So I just kind of pointed it a little bit to make it easier to fit inside of the indentation hole, and there we go. It's pretty much as simple as that. It's a rather basic shape, and then just like everything else, we have to do it again, so we're going to move on to some more details after this. Okay, so this is another one of those detail runs. A lot of it is the gray design on his shorts, which I get by flattening a bunch of pieces of gray clay, like little pieces, and just attaching them kind of, they're flat so you can press them onto the shorts, and kind of just make sure that they're not going to fall off. And essentially this continues throughout the entirety of, this design portion. So we have kind of that going on, some toothpick etching, and in between the gray lines we'll also be adding some color. So you guys will see that in a second, but like I said, a lot of this is going to be very helpful if you have some type of visual, right at your fingertips, because a lot of this as well, even with the visuals, I was sculpting on such a small scale, I couldn't even fit every single little detail into the shorts, especially on the backside of the shorts. But I tried my best. So as long as you get enough detail in there so that it looks recognizable like Shulk shorts. The lines are clean, and the color in the lines is clean. Then you're doing pretty good. Just for some 2 cents from me, if I was to do a Shulk clay figure on my own that wasn't specifically for a tutorial for YouTube that anybody could do, I would definitely choose to sculpt him out of like single colored clay, or at the very least, sculpt his base out of colored clay, but then paint on all these details, with paint because you could get a lot cleaner lines. Your colors would probably be a little bit better, and you could definitely fit in all the different texturing and stuff that he has. But it's just so hard sometimes to use colored clay because you're really limited with what you can put onto, you know, each section of whatever you're working with. So once you replicate everything that I just showed really fast on the other side of his short, because you have to do it twice, make sure that it fits onto his body and we can move on to the next part. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the detail of the leg, and there's one shape I use quite a bit, and it's this shape. It's just a small little circle of black, and now as you can see here, with those little circles, I'm adding them to various places. Some of them I'm stretching and making longer, wrapping around the whole leg. Some I'm just putting on the front of the leg. So if you use those pieces and kind of replicate not only what I'm doing here, but if you look at, any official artwork for Shulk, what he has on his leg design, and that's pretty much exactly what I'm doing here. For a brief second though, we're going to move on to the shoe. Just roll a ball of red clay together and then put a piece of blue on top, and from there just kind of form it into a shape that could fit onto his leg. And essentially you're going to just add more of those brown details from there, just as the artwork dictates. Aside from the detail though, this is something that I want to bring up now, and it's using toothpicks. So what I'm doing here is putting a toothpick inside of the shoe and then connecting it to the leg. This is so that it essentially won't fall off, which could happen quite a bit, if you don't secure your pieces with toothpicks. And I'm doing the same thing for the other leg as well, putting a toothpick inside the shorts and then connecting the leg, kind of rotating it almost very gently so I don't, ruin the shape, and also so that it's securely inside of the shorts. Now, I didn't do that to the first leg. I guess it's optional, kind of. Whatever you feel needs to have toothpicks in it, I would recommend just using your gut and going for. So once again, more detail in the shoes, just straight up from the artwork. And we're actually almost done with the detail here. And then we're going to move on to another portion of the clay figure, which is almost done at this point. If you couldn't tell already, I'm also adding some small little gray circles to those longer pieces. So now, this is what we have so far. So now all you really have to do is replicate everything we did on the first leg onto the second leg, and then after that we just really connect the pieces together and we're pretty much done. Alright, so this part can either make or break your clay figure. Now we're going to connect the pieces, and what I'm doing here is being very gentle with how I connect the pieces. So you don't want to push down too hard on any given area because then you'll smudge all the details, and you don't want to disform any shapes either. So with the hands, what I'm pretty much doing is just from the palm of the hand, I'm kind of bringing the clay to, I'm kind of stretching it out so that it connects to the shirt sleeve, and it works pretty well because the hands are so light they won't fall off or anything. But I decided to go for the toothpick method here, put 2 toothpicks into his shorts, and we're going to connect that to the rest of his body. Now, something I also want to point out here, and you got to be careful of this, is when you connect them here, and I almost do it, is you have to be careful where the toothpicks are pointed, because as I gently, very gently, I want to emphasize that, try and push the rest of the body onto the shorts, some of the toothpicks start to peek through his stomach area. So you have to make sure that the toothpicks are actually going through the entirety of his body and they won't stick out of any portion of the clay figure, because then you'll have to kind of take it off and, patch it up, and you don't want that. So now I'm just kind of making sure it's all together and stuff. Well, before putting him into the oven, we're going to make a stand. So he's obviously going to lay down in the oven, and this is where a stand comes handy because you want him to stand up when he comes out of the oven. This is oven-baked clay. So just take a circle of black clay, whatever color you want really, and just flatten it. Flatten it down so that it's a circle pretty much. Make sure all the edges are even and stuff, and that's pretty much the stand. That's all you have to do. Just to be cautious though, what you can do, and I show here, is you take the clay figure and kind of put him on the stand roughly, where you think he's going to go, just so you can make sure that it's flat enough so that he'll stand up, and, so that when he comes out of the oven, you can actually put him onto the stand, and he'll stand up, and he won't be too top heavy, or it won't be lopsided. So you just got to make sure of that too. So there's one last thing that we never actually did, and that's the face, and I saved that as last for a reason. Now there's no way I would have been able to sculpt with clay onto the face, so this is what it looks like after I did the technique that I'm going to show you in a second. So first off, with a really small pencil, I lightly drew on the details as to where the eyebrows would go, the eyes, things like that. Then after I used an inking pen and went over the pencil lines, and then after that I used some Sharpie paint to kind of create a little paint puddle and a toothpick, because that's the smallest thing I had around, to lightly color in the white around the whites of the eyes, and I even gave him a little shine in his eyes too. But with that said, guys, that concludes this tutorial on how to sculpt Shulk out of clay. He's about this large, so I scaled him pretty good. And as always, thanks for watching. If you have any other tutorials you want to suggest, feel free to leave that in the comments, as well as what you thought about this tutorial revamp, because if you've watched any of the other ones, of course, this was done in a little bit of a different style, so let me know how you guys felt about that. But, I'm El Supersonic Hugh, thank you for watching, and until the next video, Finn.
Fancy meeting you here, Monado boy!